Hey everyone, welcome to A Moment with Mavens. It's a kickoff series from Mavens and Manufacturing where I'm talking to the gentlemen of the industry. So I'm spending a moment today with Ryan Kuhlenbeck, who is the founder and CEO of Pico MES. Hello, Ryan. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Great to be here, Megan. Thanks so much
Doing great.
for setting up time to chat. So,
Yeah, I'm super happy that you've been patient with me because for those of you who are tuning in, this is like our second attempt because the first time things just my whole internet went down and out. So yeah, things happen, but thank you for your flexibility and joining me today on A Moment with Mavens. So I do want to talk to you about Pico MES. Can you give us a little backstory about that before we dive into our topic today? Because we're going to be talking about, making software cheaper. We're also going to be talking about digital instruction. So to anyone who might not know what Pico MES is, what is the company? And then also give us a little bit more information about who you are, because that's important as well too when people found companies.
well, yeah, no, which I would not recommend. It is not the fun path through life. Well,
You want to know something real quick before you start? That just reminded me, who is I think it was Nvidia, the founder of Nvidia, the CEO. He was doing an interview and he goes, yeah, if I had to do it all over again, I probably wouldn't, because it's like been one of the most stressful
yeah,
journeys of my life because it's just so ebb and flow. And I agree with that. Starting a business is very, very
it's
stressful. So
painful.
if you're not, yeah, if you're not strong at heart, don't do it.
It's right.
Not a
My,
recommendation.
I always say if you can't survive in the world without it, then if you're able to survive in the world without it, then don't bother. Like let it go. But
Right.
there I just couldn't. I can't go into another factory and use terrible software again. It would kill me. But yeah,
Yeah.
anyway,
So tell us about you and how you started Pico.
I'll give you my dime story, and that usually leads into Pico fairly well. But I grew up in the Midwest in Central Illinois, small town, lots of manufacturing around in the area, and then went to college in Missouri after getting into cars. Wanted to be an engineer to potentially try to create them. Spent 10 years with General Motors out of school on maybe a dozen different launch teams throughout their world. So I got to exposed to a huge chunk of their manufacturing and design capabilities. And then spent a couple of years with Tesla after leaving GM in the early days when we were getting ready to launch Model S and then trying to ramp it in the supply chain. And then finally had a chance to operate a manufacturing facility that made motorcycles for 3.5 years. And no matter where you're at in the auto industry, which is kind of my sweet spot, or I would imagine aerospace is similar, and some of these complex equipment manufacturing
Mhm.
systems, you're only as good as the suppliers that feed you parts, right? And that's a huge driving force for us in a couple of ways. One, the town that I lived in was filled with suppliers, so I care a lot about that because it's what underpins the community and it helps put some stability into people's lives. And then
Mhm.
two, the OEMs are, they're beholden to thousands of suppliers feeding them parts. If they get the wrong part or no part or a bad part, right, it shuts them down. It causes huge turmoil. Inventories pile up while they're working the issue, et cetera. So we wanted to do something about it. We wanted to attack what we saw as a digital divide, where large enterprises could bring technology to bear, but smaller factories were having a hard time doing the same thing. Something as
Okay.
simple as integrating, a DC nut runner, a fastening tool, the ability to, torque a bolt with precision repeatedly. Well, that's kind of bread and butter for the large factories who've been doing them for 20 years or 30 years or longer. But in the smaller facilities, you need somebody to know how do I send messages to and from this machine? How do I drive the correct rundown parameters? How do I log the data? Like that could be a complicated integration for a team that's,
Mhm.
you know, great at creating their product, but not strong in the IT world. Well,
Yeah.
we can solve that. And so we broke out Pico in 2019 and have been running like crazy ever since to try to help these small and mid-sized factories improve in as many ways as we can.
So one of the things that you pride yourself on is to make software cheaper and not more expensive. And I want you to kind of get into that a little bit because cheaper doesn't always I think people get concerned when they hear the word cheaper. It might lose on some of the quality aspects of it, right? So what led to this decision and how does it impact the manufacturing industry? And can you give us a little more information on how you make that possible? Because, some people will be like, well, we can't do that because if we cut that, then it's not going to be as good. So can you walk us through that whole process?
I love a lot of this because the background on how this type of software gets deployed into factories is important because often we're not changing
Mm-hmm.
the product at all. We're changing how it gets deployed. So today, when you want to put in a system that will provide guidance to workers, it'll connect tools and equipment so you can error proof your process, and you want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
log the information that comes out of them for traceability, either because your customer demands it of you or you want to use it for continuous improvement. Like some basic things like guide people, connect tools, capture data. Well, in today's world, you have a couple of flavors of ice cream. You've got I'll build you whatever you want, the customization world, which to me is a giant red flag. If you're telling me you're going to customize things exactly to the way I want it, that sounds great, but it means your software can't do it. Literally, by definition, it's saying my software out of the box cannot meet your needs, so I have to customize it to do so. And to me, that's a huge problem because that customization layer costs a lot of money. If you have to have someone writing code for you, regardless of where they live in the world, and somebody else is playing the telephone game of telling them how to do so, all of that is people's
Mm-hmm.
time and effort, and it causes a huge chunk of money. A typical deployment of a manufacturing infrastructure system, similar to Pico, could be anywhere from 30 to 70% in services. Right? If you're spending, so think about it, if you're spending $100,000, you're spending 30 to 70 grand, just in setting it up and not in the
Mm-hmm.
software itself. And that to me is a huge red flag. So our first thing to get cost down, well, we believe cost is a key friction point. Most
Mm-hmm.
factories can actually afford significant amounts of software if they know the ROI on the other side will be there, the return on their investment, right? No one's, so if I give you $20 and then you in exchange hand me 100, most people will do that, right? They're like, oh, that sounds like a great deal, right? But it's the risk of, will you really give me back 100 that holds it? Well, if we lower the
Yeah.
price and the entry point down and down and down, it just allows people to take that first step with less risk. That's one piece, is price. The second piece is effort. If it's free, but it takes me a year and a half to deploy it, it's not really free. You're just charging, the cost is in resources. So we need to make it much, much easier and faster to deploy so that people can
Mm-hmm.
get it into the system. We can have you, if we have a handful of these case studies are really fun to point to, especially the public ones. But if you're on paper and pencil at 8 a.m. in the morning and you're using standard tools, so something that can be bought commercially, doesn't even have to be, it can be fairly unique to you, just not custom. Like by 4 o'clock that afternoon, we will have you fully done at that station, right? Including the infrastructure setup, your ability to create 30 to 50 steps worth of work instructions for that process, hook up half a dozen tools, get the screens in place, take the pictures, all of that can happen that fast. And you're often doing the next thing at the end of the day. That used to take 6 months or more to do what I just described, right? And so for me, the way we're so hyper focused on cost is it's just a visible metric for good, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we're driving it down because we care about the other side of the house here, which is scale. I really
Mm-hmm.
want every individual factory to run really well, but I know there's a synergy when every factory in a supply chain can communicate with each other with a digital backbone. It unlocks a whole nother level of efficiency, but it will not happen if we can't get this technology in place. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned yesterday, it's like smartphones when they first launched, right? They had some basic apps on them, and now look at everything that's been built on top of that connectivity, that computer in your pocket capability. Well, we can do the same thing in the manufacturing world when suppliers can see when their parts are consumed at the OEM, so they can better match inventory carrying costs. Or you
Hmm.
can sort components like a rotor shaft. Instead of it having extremely tight tolerances for a motor shaft, you could have an A, B, and C part, and then match that with A, B, and C bearings or housings or whatever that might be, and you reduce your total cost because you can have a broader tolerance band and still manage, that variation and still yield a perfect product on the other side. But you can't do it if you can't communicate, and you can't communicate if you don't have a way to transfer knowledge back and forth or data. And
Right.
so we're driving to lower and lower costs because we have a bigger goal in mind, frankly,
Hmm.
which is seeing all of the supply base win. So the nuts and bolts of how to get the cost down are really fun. We can go in that way, but our goal at the end of the day is that scale.
I find it interesting how you like pointed out the negative like consequence of calling something custom, because I hear that a lot in manufacturing. And as a tech writer, I've had some companies get angry with me because I'm like, well, what do you mean by custom? Like, how is it custom? And they're like, what? And I'm like, well, what's so custom about it? Because Joe Schmo down the street from you is saying the same thing, that they do custom stuff. What does that actually mean? Like, is it a brand new thing each and every single time, or are you actually working out like with a standard set of things? And I think you make a valid point. Like, when it comes to custom stuff, sometimes it's based off of trial and error too, which can also extend the integration time and like getting things set up appropriately, and it just takes more time and costs more that way. um I'm assuming there's a difference somewhere with smaller to medium sized businesses and larger corporations. So, how does Pico sort of like balance the need for affordability with maintaining the quality and functionality of your software, especially across like the different sizes of facilities and manufacturers?
Yeah, so some of that leads into the custom world you were talking about. The customization is fine when it is actually, to your point, custom. There's a difference between properly modeling how you run your factory. The most annoying thing is when you have to change how your factory operates to line up to some software constraint from your ERP or your MES or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. And that is just, it's a no-fly zone for us. But there's a difference for us. We do a bottoms-up approach. And this is how it blends the needs of small factories all the way up to large enterprises. We
Okay.
believe that no matter what you are making, you can model it. If you look at the fundamentals, every factory has a series of events that happen in a logical sequence, in a
Mm-hmm.
prescribed order, right? You can have things happening in series, you can have things happening in parallel. There's optionality in certain ways where you don't care if part A, B, or C is installed first. You just need all three of them to be in place before you get to part D. Well, our software allows you to do just that. You can build out workflows that drag and drop how things move across your stations. You can have your steps laid out so that it's do this, then that, then this, then that. But that fundamentals based approach allows the software to model your factory instead of a top down approach where you have to define everything on day one. That's hard coded in the background. And then if you want to make a change to it, you've got to tell somebody else who's adjusting that software to fix it for you. There's a telephone game. It's really nasty because how well can you really predict something as complicated as a factory on day one and prescribe the whole thing? So the
Yeah.
bottoms up approach helps. On the other side of the house, you have tools that live somewhere in the physical world. Tools, machines, people, anything that is a physical constraint, right? You can't be in the same place at the same time, two places at the same time. So that's the constraints
As
that are
much as I would
applied.
love to do that,
Yeah, if I could have clones of me, that would make life a lot easier.
especially
The
with kids, right?
That's
Jeez.
right. They're not quite the clone I was hoping for, right? They're unable to jump in and do the work. They tend to drive other work. So, but yeah, the idea on that side of the house though is you can use the same process in like 5 different stations all running in parallel. It's very common in
Hmm.
machining, right? You might have 5 stations all making the
Yeah.
same parts, same machine, but you
Hmm.
can't have the same machine do 2 things at the same time, right? It's always doing unless, each head or each milling opportunity is still doing one thing, regardless of how many of them are there. And so we
Yeah.
use that as the constraints. And work occurs when you match the digital world of processes and workflows to the physical world of stations and devices. It's in the weeds of how we're set up, but we're very different than everyone else. And it allows us to model all these different factories. But more importantly, it allows for modularity. And I think that's the real
Okay.
breakthrough we've done is our software is modular. If you looked at it and said, hey, I just like your worker guidance. I want to use that. And I don't need connected tools yet. And I don't need business system integrations like ERP connections. Great. Here's a low cost work instruction piece. Now you can actually get it for free if you have less than 10 stations in your factory. The idea being is boom, it's low effort for us, so we don't lose on it, and low effort for you to get started. You get all access to these suite of tools, and you can take that first step. You might in the future look around and go, hey, we need more than 10 stations. Great. Well, for $100 a user or $1,000 a month for your entire factory, 12 grand a year, ultra low cost, right? You
Yeah.
now have the full suite of tools, unlimited, go to town, right? You have all the digital side of the house for work instructions. You come around later and are like, oh man, we just forgot to tighten the bolt. Our customer's pissed. It cost us a bunch of money to sort parts. Integrated DC nut runner, add a connected station. Boom, you're done. Like you have access to all of these
Hmm.
tools. There's 200 families of different types of tools in our library that all play with no code. It's just massive. And every
That's
one of them,
insane.
it's I love it. It's the engineer's candy store. I mean, it's what is so powerful about it is every one of them was added to solve a problem. Like we didn't go out
Hmm.
for funsies and try to like, hey, what can we integrate today? Right? People are asking us to bring in these new tools because they want to solve a problem. Well, what that is inherently doing, because every new tool added to the library goes to everybody on the platform, well, it's just spreading solutions across. Oh, you had a
Hmm.
problem where they didn't apply enough grease. Well, so you bought a $400 scale, you set the grease tube on it beforehand. That's your initial weight. You apply it, you set it back on it. If it didn't dispense enough by mass, to put more in, right? Like there's little
Hmm.
things like that. There's so many of these little solutions that we've now brought together for people to have access to. The average user on our platform uses 3% of them. It's like scanners, printers, a couple of tools, maybe an electrical tester if they're doing work like that, or a leak tester, or whatever they needed.
Hmm.
They ignored the vast majority of them, but what they needed was there. And then now we get to give away, like we don't charge to integrate a new commercially available device. There's no hidden fees. There's no BS where you're like, hey, somebody released a new, pick your flavor, a new caliper system with Bluetooth, and I want to use it for
Okay.
in-process inspection. No problem. Send us the part number of what it is. Usually it takes us less than a day to have it in the system. We push it to your deployment, and then it goes into our
Hmm.
next update for everyone else to have. And then you're using it. It's basically just buy
Hmm.
the tool. And that gives teams the freedom to solve problems. We believe manufacturing suffers. Most small and mid-sized factories operate in the 40 to 60% OEE is the official numbers, but call it
Yep.
60% output. If you theoretically could make 100 parts per shift, you're making roughly 60 on average. Well, to get up to the industry standard of 85, or call it 80 to 90, that's 25%, just for rough math. Well, you're not going to find a single 25% hand grenade. It's not like, oh man, all I had to do was walk over. Oh, Bill, why didn't I just tell Bill to add 25% more output? Shoot, if I would have thought of that 3 months ago, look where we'd be, right? It's death by a
Right.
thousand cuts. It's all these little things that happen sporadically throughout your day that maybe one day that station had an issue, a different station has another issue the next day. It's firefighting. It's what everyone in
Hmm.
factories is used to. It's like, all right, what went wrong on third shift last night? What do I got to undo? Let me look at the scrap pile this morning, see what's in it. How many issues were set over in the past down notes from the previous shift, blah, blah, blah. Well, our goal is to let you squash those 1% failures just over and over and over again in minutes. Forgot to tighten the
Hmm.
bolt. All right, here comes a torque tool. We didn't tighten, they missed a riv nut on an installation. Smart camera, bang. done. You never had to worry about it again. Simply the airline pressure was set low at the regulator. Well, here's a $15 pressure transducer to make sure the air pressure in the line is always at the right value or within the right range. These are just simple things that solve simple problems, and you just playing whack-a-mole, except the mole
Mhm.
doesn't get back up. Like, you actually solved the problem. And you turn back 6 months or a year later and you're like, wow, we actually gained 25% or more. And the business has
Yeah.
doubled its profitability on that particular commodity they were selling. And, ideally somebody got a raise on the floor for it. And the
Mhm.
company as a whole is now stable. And hell, at the minimum, the pizza shop got a pizza party to celebrate the thing, right? They had a good day. But it all happens because of these little nuances that we try to enable. Sorry, I'm rambling, but I get passionate about it.
No, I love it. So is it fair to say then that Pico MES, like your specialty, is digital work instructions, or
It's
is
the
there other things that you focus on?
it's the
Because we're going to talk
foundation.
about digital. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So can you define that? Because when I think of digital work instructions, immediately I'm thinking of, because I've seen this before at trade shows, and it's not just with work instructions, it's with factory layouts and like seeing if a machine will fit into your facility. But I'm immediately going to Google or Apple VR glasses and having, or like some sort of screen that's in front of your face. What is that movie with Tom Hanks where he's like moving things around? Or Iron Man 2 is doing it. So that's like immediately where my nerd brain goes to, but that's not necessarily what it is. So can you kind of like explain what digital work instructions are and like how Pico MES is integrating them into work facilities and helping it make processes more efficient?
So the types of factories we support are those where human beings are involved, right? So there are
Okay.
people in the system, and there's going to be people, even with bipod robots. I promise you, there'll still be people. But
Yeah.
so at some point, you need to write down, here's what we want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
It can be in, like I said, I'll keep picking on Bill. It can be in Bill's head, and no one else understands how to do that work other than Bill. But Bill's still following a
Right.
set of instructions. You may not like them because he made them up on the fly, but that's how work is getting done. In most factories, there's this engineer-created documentation package. It's got too much information because it's trying to do everything in one thing. It's handed to the
Mm-hmm.
operators. The operators typically don't use them. Maybe it's a laminated piece of paper over on a clipboard off to the side, or a binder filled with how it works. Even if there are
Mm-hmm.
screens in place, if they have to come up and say, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that, right? It's not that useful. But you have to start
Yeah.
somewhere. So the first thing is,
Mm-hmm.
this is your lean principles if we go down that journey. But what is the standard version of doing this work? How do I want you to do the job? And for us,
Mm-hmm.
what we do is we give you the ability to do that in a scalable manner. You don't have to
Okay.
scale with it, but it allows you to add tool connections later, or to drive more functionality into it, or implement skills matrix, or all these other kind of like bigger, more complicated systems that you eventually
Mm-hmm.
want to get to. But at its beginning,
Mm-hmm.
it's just making sure that people know how to do the job. And there's two primary
Right.
benefits right off the bat. One, your training time burden is significantly reduced, which is a big deal when you have a lot of attrition, or people coming and going inside of the factory. It also is a big
Mm-hmm.
deal on how you communicate with younger generations, right? No one wants to follow
Mm-hmm.
Bill around and memorize what Bill does. If
Right.
there is images and videos and an immersive environment around them, that's great. And it's more like how they operate at home, right? Where you might look at YouTube
Mm-hmm.
to figure out how to do something. VR and AR are interesting. I think they're more of a science project than a reality at this point. There's some useful stuff where, like, if you have the tablet and maybe you're doing PM on a machine, and you're only coming over
Mm-hmm.
there every 6 months, that's actually really helpful. The tablet can show you remind you what all the different blocks are doing inside of the controls panel, or uh, things like that. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
guiding somebody in a repetitive environment and you're doing a light show in front of them all day long, you're just going to piss them off. Frankly, like,
Mm-hmm.
nobody wants that. They want to be left alone and to do their job. But training is a huge deal because now all they have to do is learn how the screens function, whether it's on a
Mm-hmm.
tablet or a touchscreen or a computer or whatever it is. You learn like, oh, okay, here's where the text is that describes something. Here's where the image is that's showing me what step I'm on and reminding me what to do. In our world, we have linked content. So if I push on the blue text, it'll pull up the drawing or link out to different images or things like that. So they know there's more content. And if they haven't seen something in 6 months, maybe you have a SKU that you haven't built in a long time, that screen is still just as familiar and they know where to get the information from them. So you don't have to train them on every process possible in the factory. You have to train them on things like basic skills. Here's how a torque tool works. Here's what we mean by applying some, epoxy or something like that. And they learn how to interface with the screen. You're down in a couple hours, right? It's a very simplified thing. And then they can get to line rate over, course of a week or two, but not without any quality issues. Anyway, training's number one. And then number two is an interesting phenomenon that happens. We're a big fan of making information available, but getting the hell out of the way of the operator. So our system has the ability to go into experienced operator mode, or we call it jump mode, but it basically will skip all of the documentation only steps and just go to where they have a quality check or a required like scan action, torque action, whatever that might be. But the idea is if they know what they're doing, don't make them walk over to the screen and be like, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that. Well, if you trust them, you enable this for it. And then the gatekeeping quality checks are still there. And as long as they're doing them in the right order, it just auto advances through it. For those that aren't familiar with that process, then it's all sitting right there, right? They can swipe through it each time. Oh, okay, I got to route the harness. Yep, now I got to put the seal in. Okay, now I close the lid. I need to measure this thing. And it walks them through step by step until they are comfortable. But it gives them that choice. Often that feedback on how long it took to do something, just having that can increase the output of the factory significantly. There's all kinds of really interesting studies. It's 5 to 15%. I think 8% is the actual like scientific standard, but it's a range between those. That just having something that says, hey, last time it took you 5 minutes to do it. This time it took you 4 minutes and 55 seconds. It's like playing a video game. If you get a feedback to it, it's there. And maybe 10% of the workforce will actually try to get better, and 80% will just be thinking about what's for lunch and dinner and enjoy their job a little bit more because the anxiety level has dropped. Well, that's a big effect, and that's just from having some form of standard work in front of people and feedback mechanism. But to me, that's just the first step. We want people to be able to get on the other end of our spectrum. You mentioned enterprise, and how do you get all the way to like super high quality stuff? Well, the user interface we just described for the UI, that's really important. It's very high quality. We're not asking you to figure out how the hell to put pictures on the screen and what is the right way to display this. We've already done that hard work. But we can then tie it to all the really advanced things as well. So first of all, the uptime is a key thing for us. Our system has to be 5 nines reliable, 99.999% reliable, no matter what hardware it's on. So that's a very big deal for us. So we've focused on that long before anyone ever sees anything. No one cares why your factory shut down. They only care about the fact that it's shut down. So just don't ever do that. The second piece of the puzzle, though, is access to the advanced technologies. So we, on our other end of the spectrum, we still support some enterprises facilities. We build semi-trucks in one of them. Like long, there's nothing more complicated than that line. It's crazy to see, a long hauler followed by a cement mixer, followed by an RV chassis, followed by a dump truck. Like the configuration capabilities inside of these worlds are just crazy. But we have the tools to go all the way to that. We can manage that workflow. We can look up from databases. We can tie into external business systems. Like the quality of the product is always expanding because every user is always adding more and more and more capabilities to it. And that's really the neat part for our customers is they're on a journey. You can get off whenever you want, but you always have that ability to keep scaling. We try not to limit you. So.
Okay. I have so many questions right now. So with digital work instructions, are you focusing specifically on certain processes within a facility. So like with CNC machining, there's going to be some changes within the programming depending on what sort of errors might happen within that process. Or are you basically focusing on the people side of things where humans are actually assembling things together?
Yeah, so we focus on where the people are. So the assembly
The
is the biggest
people.
need, right? Because that's where there's the
Yeah.
majority, the majority for the need of documentation, but also for control
Mm-hmm.
and backing up the operator. In the CNC world, you think about load and unload. Well, if you, it depends on the
Right.
type of machining you're doing. If you're loading up a pallet farm and it's going to sit and run
Mm-hmm.
for 2 days before the next time you go in and load up the next set of material, if you're starting from billet
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, you might use a really lightweight version of Pico just to make sure the raw material was put onto the tombstone exactly the way it needed to, and to confirm that all the fasteners are torqued so the part didn't come loose and crash the spindle. If it's a
Gotcha.
repetitive load and unload, you might just be documenting that time frame, or in process inspection is the most common on that. How
Mm-hmm.
do I collect the information that I'm doing from calipers so they're not writing it down on a check sheet that gets scanned or manually entered into
Mm-hmm.
Excel? Very simple stuff. But over on the other end of the business, where they take that machine part or injection molded part or whatever it is, and they're going to put it into an assembly, now you get
Yeah.
access to more tools. You don't have to use them, but you could add video to show how something is assembled. Harness routing is an example I like to use, where it takes a lot of images to show how to tuck a harness in, and I can do it in a
Mm-hmm.
5-second video from my cell phone, infinitely better.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get access to all the tools, so you can bring in, connected tools or cameras or whatever it might be to aid that assembly process, and then all of the data flowing back off of it for the traceability and continuous improvement aspects. So it's focused on those. So the instructions are kind of as complicated or as granular as they need to be for the
Mm-hmm.
application, and I think that gives people
Gotcha.
flexibility. So.
What about any processes that kind of combine the human side of things with robotics and automation? Do you provide instructions for that as well?
Yeah, you'd be surprised how rare it is we bump into that. But the
Okay.
with automation in the first part, we try not to be what's called the HMI, so the human machine interface. So think of like the screen
Okay.
that has live data and buttons on it.
Yeah.
We can do that, but there's just better software for it. So for example, like
Mm.
Ignition software, it does that really well. And then we plug in to Ignition so that we can manage the flow of material from the automation to the human side, or maybe
Okay.
ancillary operations of loading the equipment, like, hey, what lot code of epoxy went into this system? And then
Mm-hmm.
also the data coming off the system, like battery manufacturing creates a ton of data. So we are able to ingest all that, organize it, tie it all the way back to the finished pack that left,
Mm-hmm.
with all the details in between. And so we get lightweight when something else is there to fill the gap. Like, we love to do that. That's the modularity of it. If it's a cobot, our integration to something like a cobot would likely only tell you that the amount of motion on the joints, so that we know when the PM is required. End effector setups, if it's a commercially available end effector, can often be, we can use data or drivers to bring all of that in.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to teach it. You still have to train it. I don't know what you
Yeah.
want to do with it. All I can do is reduce that
Right.
burden and just make it easier for you to put it in. And then that way, when you do have a hiring problem, you can still produce your goods, because now you're able to put a robot on this little application and readjust your people to the pieces that
Yeah.
weren't automatable. So, gap filler.
What about, and that's another interesting thing that I might, because I think what I would like to see happen, because artificial intelligence keeps coming up, and like chat GPT, whatever, machine learning. So like you mentioned the workforce issue, and I'm kind of wondering, is there a space for somewhere in the future where digital work instructions would be something that you upload to a robot or something that's automated, so that if you're lacking those human elements, then it will just take that information from the digital work instructions and then complete that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like
I
maybe
mean,
I'm getting too sci-fi here, but
it's
I don't know.
possible. So the way we see, I hate the term AI, but the way we see large language models and machine learning algorithms come into play in manufacturing,
Mm-hmm.
there's some neat tools that'll take a CAD file, for example. It'll make it an estimate for, okay, these are all operations that need to happen. It's got bolts, it's got brackets, and it'll break that out into individual steps, and then that'll form the basis of your work instructions. Those are awesome tools because it happens really
Yeah,
quick. There's similar things
but
out there
check
as
them.
well where, yeah, you always got to check them.
Check
And
them.
yep, and then there's video versions of it where you can take a video and it'll break it down into the steps, but then you kind of have crappy images typically. You can imagine like motion in a video doesn't form the best picture of a
Mm-hmm.
static documentation package. And if you care, you got to update them. If you don't, well, then leave the crappy image. But either way, I see those as the first level of advances. It's just reducing the burden of creating things. And then the
Okay.
second piece of the puzzle then becomes, okay, could I push that into an automation system automatically? There's other teams that are working on that, coming off, usually off the CAD side of the house. How could I then
Mm-hmm.
drive known motions and known connections? I haven't seen it there today, but could I imagine a world in the future where it's possible? Sure, it's connecting data with rules
Yeah.
effectively, right, in the background that are doing it. Whether we understand the rules, whether they're a black box, it's a great question. Check it is another one. Like language
Yeah.
translations, better check it.
Especially
Uh,
with technical information, it gets really
yeah,
wonky sometimes, and depending on where you're at. Oh, and okay, that's another question I'll ask after this one. What about like maintenance processes? Are you providing any instructions for those? Because there's a lot of maintenance now that's coming up
sure.
with some of these advanced technologies. So are you able to get that workflow and how people maybe train someone that's new in the maintenance area?
So again, these are all we pride ourselves on having just a really killer toolbox for people to use as they see fit,
Yeah.
or bring us in and we
Okay.
can consult and advise as needed. But the I'm also a huge fan of don't reinvent something that's already out there and works really well. So for
Mhm.
example, I think MaintainX and Limble are two of the big up and coming maintenance management systems, and they bring in the ticketing
Gotcha.
side of the house with them. So can Pico do the documentation of work instructions for doing maintenance? Absolutely. It's right in the wheelhouse, right? It's a series of steps, logical sequence.
Yeah.
We even have the ability to do some really fun stuff where, like, depending on the answer to this question, we can change what happens downstream over here so that you can manage different fault trees and what happens if this type of failure mode needs this type of remedial action. There's some neat stuff that
Mhm.
can be set up in Pico. But you know that if MaintainX or Limbo works really well for you, or one of the other systems that are out there, we would much rather just integrate with it. So they have
Gotcha.
APIs available. We build the integration. It's usually a standard integration, for instance, to MaintainX. There's nothing difficult about that. And now, like an operator who's using Pico to do the repetitive work can say, "Hey, this machine went down. It looks like
Mhm.
this error code," or whatever it might be. We'll send whatever data we have over to that system as it creates its ticket. And now the maintenance team can work in that system because they like it better. More power to you,
Mhm.
right? Like pick the thing that works well for you. Our job is to make sure it plays together seamlessly and you didn't have to spend a ton of money connecting things together, right? Because the
Yeah.
alternative is you go buy one of these platforms, usually off an ERP, and
Mhm.
it's good at one thing, whatever the hell it was created for. So like the accountants love it, and then everybody else in the factory gets to hate it for a different reason, right? Because
Right.
it's marginal on the shop floor, it's marginal for maintenance, it's marginal for managing your bill of material, it's marginal for material transfers, but it's a platform and you didn't have to integrate them together. Well, that sucks.
Yeah.
It's really annoying. It'd be like having to use your cell phone and all you have is Apple created apps and none others. Right. Well, that banking is
Yeah.
going to really be annoying, right? Like when you have to log into Apple to get to your bank. Like we try
Mhm.
to eliminate that and instead allow everything to play as seamlessly as it does in these kind of app store style
Okay.
approaches. So we're a fan of, we
So
call it best of breed systems playing together.
I love that show, by the way, when it comes to the dog show. But so, all right. So with the production of instructions, my background is technical writing, and it's one of
Yep.
my least favorite things to do because it can be tedious, and we get so used to doing things every day that we kind of forget about those micro steps in between. So like for example, when I was going through school with to get my degree, one of our projects was to create a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And there was 12 of us in the class. Not one of us had a successful set of instructions. And things change over time, especially with all the advancements of technology and then things that you would add to your process. Like things are going to constantly change. So, where does Pico start? Do you start kind of with, the written set of instructions, the documentation that might have been created 10, 15 years ago? Do you start with the senior engineer that's been there his whole life and like has all of the information in his head? Like, how does your process of creating these digital instructions start? And how often are they updated? And how involved are you in creating the actual digital instructions?
We come at it from two approaches typically. So there's
Okay.
something already exists and we want to start from that. So think you have your
Yeah.
Word documents or whatever you built it on. Or
Okay.
it doesn't exist and we want to capture what's happening today or define it effectively. So
Okay.
new factories are defining things, but factories that maybe were tribal knowledge based are capturing what somebody's
Hmm.
doing. They
Okay.
function in a similar way. The difference is if you have something that exists, we can often import it to help you get started. We call it a nudge. You know,
Okay.
unstructured work if it's built in Word, it's probably somebody. It's a mechanical Turk, right? We have a team of people that can just import them faster than you could, right? My team can
Okay.
spend each person can spend 40 hours working on it. A person in the factory might get an hour a day when they're not fighting fires or dealing with their day job. So we can just get there much
Yeah.
faster. And because we're really good at it, we can also, if it is possible to use a script or something to pull content out and bring it into the digital world or the connected world, we're going to be pretty good at doing it, right?
Okay.
So that side of it, we are often helping the teams. We want people to reach out and say, hey, we have all these instructions. Can you help us get them in the system? If you're starting from scratch, what we typically tell people to do is like it's 3 times your tack time. You're going to build 3 of them. So the first time through, you're just going to get the steps written down. So we have an Excel view. You can pull it up, take a look at it. But you're literally just saying, oh, okay, you did this, then you did that, then you did this, then you did that. Just
Yeah.
give it like the names of your steps. The second time through, you're probably grabbing images, maybe video, typing up the details of what somebody's doing while they're following it through. You're adding that second content. You could obviously go straight to that if you wanted to, if you're
Hmm.
able to keep up with the process. But it's just this concept of, outline first. It's like your whiteboard. Okay, now then detail. And then the third time through is feedback. So the operator is now like,
Okay.
okay, well, I'm going to sit back and let you use it. And I want you to tell me when you don't like the image or you say, hey, I had a question about this. What do you mean by this text? And then from there on, what is really neat about Pico is our goal has always been to enable 5-minute or less changes. It comes from my experience in factories where at best I had 5 minutes between whatever fire or whatever meeting I was going to. And for me to be productive in that environment, I needed to be able to make a change that fast, including the transition into your software, right? Because your brain's got to shift around on how you are going to use it, and
Yeah.
the transition back out of your software to whatever the hell it is you got to go do next. So in other words,
Yeah.
it better be damn fast to make a change.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
the final piece of the puzzle is make it easy, and then you can expand who does it. So we actually have buttons right in the screens where an operator can make a process improvement suggestion. If they have a tablet
Okay.
at the station or a cell phone, they can actually take an image or a video and say, hey, here's what I mean. Like, hey, this is down rev, snap an image, boom, there it is. It uploads into the system. It'll, the engineer, whoever's in charge of the work instructions is still has the ability to say nope or yes, right? But they can make that update and you can get more of the team involved. Usually it's a skilled
Hmm.
tech who's honestly building all this stuff out. and the engineers
Oh,
are
okay.
improving it. The thing that
Good.
to encourage the teams to realize, and we have a ton of different tools, is yes, engineer, I know you want to document every little nuance to this thing and part numbers and all of the piece of the puzzle, and we have tools to
Yeah.
do all of that. But that doesn't mean the operator actually cares. If you've got 50 pieces that go together in this assembly, but it's always the same 50 part numbers, they're not making a pick. Why are you burdening them with the bill of material right in front of them, right in their face? If you're not asking them to
Yeah.
validate something, then don't put it in front of them. Like, so we have a collapsible bomb, and you can have it shown in different ways. But that's the idea: is only show them what they need, because to read it, if they're going to read the screen, that takes time, and that time is spent reading and not working. So it hurts your
Yeah.
efficiency. And on the other end of it, if you overwhelm them with information, they'll ignore it, and now you're back into, it's whatever's in Bill's head for how this thing gets built. So most engineers don't know how to balance that, and that's the point of our UI. Unlike others, we don't give you a blank canvas and say, where do you want to put things? We say, this is a
Hmm.
known good interface. Here's why, and here's all the tools that it has to meet your needs as the engineer for documentation, but also the needs of the supervisor who might need to answer a question, as well as the needs of the operator who has to do the work. So it's pretty
I
cool,
like
but it's
that.
really simple stuff. It just
Yeah.
comes down to, like, don't be an asshole, right? Actually think about everybody who has to use these things,
Yeah.
and not just one person who has to use these
Right.
things.
I love
So
that. Well, can you share some specific success stories of companies that have really implemented your digital work instructions, and like what sort of improvements it has helped
yeah,
them like gain?
most factories, through the wonderful world of NDAs we live in, restrict what we can talk
Oh
about. But
yeah.
we have a few that have done marketing case studies, so you can see them on our webpage. It's great. There's videos and more details, but I'll give you a
Thank you for
couple of
not the
examples.
NDAs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, most people are like, okay, we should talk about this. It'll improve everyone.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
the it ranges. And what I love about what Pico does is this modularity allows all kinds of different little wins here and there. Like, I call it
Hmm.
industrial tourism. I get to geek out on everybody's successes. But the public ones, you've got on one side of the house, high mix environment, building lots of parts. You might not see a SKU for 6 months. How the hell do you train people on how to build these things, and then also allow them to build them efficiently and not spend the first two
Hmm.
hours trying to remember how to do it? So that type of station is just digital work instructions. The screen
Okay.
is set up. People are trained on how the screen functions. So there's like a primary image, there's text, there's link out to drawings. And then if there is quality steps they have to do, instead of it being on a on a clipboard and a check sheet, it's integrated right there in the station when they're ready to do it. And so the operator feels comfortable that at any given time, they have the information they need. And when they get into muscle memory, they can ignore it. Right? It can go into jump mode. It can just get the hell out of the way. And literally all they're
Yeah.
doing is saying, I started the build, I finished the build. I started the build, I finished the build, right? And it's just saying, often if you have a connected station, it gets really easy. You set it on a $2 micro switch, and okay, I know the part's there, and
Yeah.
boom. But that organization of the knowledge of what to do actually picked
Hmm.
up significant amounts of output. And it did it in a couple of ways. One, for the first time, each build now has a cycle time. Right? Just think about that of like, okay, I'm building 50 of these things. I might have 5 going at the same time, but as I finish my batch of 5, well, I know I finished 5 of them, and I restart,
Yeah.
the system, and it goes through again. Well, you can check your cycle times first of all, and it also gives feedback to the operators. So, we had one factory gain 50%, 50, in output, and I mean a big chunk of that was
Wow.
just improper targets. Right? They didn't build the parts often enough to bother going down there with a stopwatch and measuring how long it takes. It was an estimate from a CAD model, and they closed the loop on it the first time they built it. Right? They're like, oh, well, actually, look at it. Here's how long it actually took to do that operation. Oh, we had way less time in our study for that, or way more time, and they picked up a ton on that just because now the operator is not twiddling their thumb at the end trying to hit. They're going to hit whatever target you
Yeah.
give them, as
Right.
any of us would. So now that side of the house was good. Their bonuses actually go up. There's more output. It ended up being a big win for them. But the other big part of the gain is actually just that gamification that comes from feedback. They don't have every operator trying to go faster, but a couple of them would figure out little tips and tricks, and they could capture them
Mhm.
with a cell phone, add them to the work instructions. That 5-minute change, this is where it's really important. And you're like, oh, interesting, Bill, you've produced 10% more than anybody else. What'd you do? Run through one real quick while it's front top of mind. Got my cell phone out or a GoPro, take a video. I upload that thing. It alerts everybody else. Hey, check out this new video, and they go, oh, well, I hadn't thought of doing it that way. That's interesting. It's when your standard work isn't that standard.
Yeah.
And you can find a new technique, or you're just wrong.
Mhm.
That's the first level of win, is that it's a big training burden reduction. It used to take them months to train people. I think their official answer was that it took 90 days to go from new hire to line rate, and that was dropped down to 2 weeks. Right? It wasn't zero. It's not
Wow.
instant. They still had to learn how to do things and get up to speed, but it dramatically reduces that burden, and a supervisor doesn't have to stand over their shoulders for that long. That's a high
Yeah.
mix environment too. So,
Gotcha.
and then the output increase. A portion of it they materialized, a portion they didn't. The other side of the house, though, are the people who are like, hey, I want to do that, and I've got a safety critical fastener in the mix here. So that same factory,
Mm.
they're in northern Indiana. I don't remember if I mentioned that, but in the RV industry, had a safety critical fastener that was a pain in the ass. It required a very special tool, really expensive tool, $25,000 air over hydraulic or pulse tool. But to get
Wow.
into where they needed it to get to, and to hit the torque values they needed, and then they had a reasonable mix of configurations. I think it was about a dozen different processes that's a single station had to manage. This one gets 4 bolts, this one gets 8, this one gets 12, this one is high torque, this one's medium torque, this one's slow torque, and then the permutations of that. So they needed the work
Okay.
instructions just to manage telling the operator what to do, but then it could be connected to that tool. Well, they had a couple of quality
Mhm.
escapes in their past, and that's a big deal when that
Oh.
happens. So they
Yeah.
implement Pico, and now it literally cannot happen. So, the engineers used to have to check this system all the time. They were always working on training. As new operators would come in, you had to try to get people to be perfect. Did you paint stripe it? Did you really torque it to the right value? Like coming back with clicker wrenches. There's just all this non-value added work that didn't really solve the problem. And then you implement
Yeah.
the instructions with that single connected tool, and they never have the issue again. I think they've made several thousand chassis since then, zero
That's
escapes,
cool.
zero issues, data off every one of them. And besides the cost of the tool, it's like a tiny incremental change in the cost for us. I think we charge
Yeah.
$100 a connected station. So
That's
it
really
gave them,
cool.
yeah, and now the engineer, instead of spending their time over there keeping an eye on that build, actually, he's like, I haven't been over there in probably 2 weeks. I've been over in this other building implementing continuous improvement, like actually getting to do his job, because he's not firefighting, a
Yeah.
system that just wasn't set up correct. So, and
Which
it
I
goes
believe
on and
more
on and on.
companies would appreciate it. But not everything's a success story, right? So there's got to be some common challenges that manufacturers face when adopting digital work instruction. So do you know some of those common challenges that you've
Oh
seen,
yeah.
and how does Pico MES help companies overcome those?
The biggest challenge we see is trying to eat an elephant on day one.
I
So if you try to roll
think that
out
expression.
yeah, I'm open to a better one, by the way. But if you try to do a massive project on day one, what ends up happening? So the key to systems like this is you got to get it in use. If you're hanging out in
Mhm.
pilot forever, then you end up having you're still dealing with all the issues of the day. It's really difficult for teams to manage this your older way of building things, because it's not a 0 to 1, right? And alongside trying to
Right.
actually push the ball forward. So if you have a factory with 400 stations in it, for example, and you try to go across them all on day one because somebody convinced you that that was the only way to keep your inventory up to date, which is total bullshit, by the way. ERP companies, I got a whole nother set of conversations on how that whole world works. But we're a firm believer of crawl, walk, run, right? You might have to do an
Okay.
8-station line all at the same time, but if you could just do one station and get it in use, that moves the ball forward. It saves you 5 minutes. You get 5 minutes of your day back because at least that station's not going to ask you questions in the future, right?
Mhm.
Like it has the information it needs. It has this system that allows it to update rapidly. And then you go do the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. Or you bring in a team if you need help to get it over the line, and they can apply a lot more hours in a shorter period of time and get it going. But it's the team. The,
Mhm.
the real struggle is when you try to do a really big project. It never kind of gets adopted. It doesn't really get over the line. You never get to use it in the system. So the operators, that rotate in and out of it don't really like it because it's different than what they've done. It ends up
Yeah.
being that type of issue. So when we see what we call churn, or people who start and stop, it's almost always because they never got it over the line. And so,
Mhm.
we can provide advice, but no one has to listen to us. Um,
Right.
so we're just trying to help teams realize, like, as fast as you can get to value, the operator had a better day, the business produced more parts, you improved your first pass yield, reduced your scrap. The faster you can get to that, even in a small scale, the more you can copy and paste it. And that's that
Mm.
modular form of what we do. It's very different than the traditional rollout where you have to dedicate 2 people for 6 months just to design the damn thing. And then by the time
Yeah.
you test it, you figure out the world has changed and now you've got to update everything to whatever is different. And it just is a much more painful thing. That's why technology like this really only existed in the enterprises for so long. Is it was just such a giant pain in the
Gosh.
ass to get it started. So
So,
yeah.
other than it being a big giant pain in the ass to get it started, there's got to be some sort of barriers for companies who, are probably thinking about adopting some sort of software. Um, do you know like the biggest barrier that is preventing companies from adopting this type of software, and how do you like address those barriers and kind of get them to sway over to adopting it? Because I feel like there's some companies who are maybe from the smaller end of the spectrum who might not have the biggest budget or not the best understanding of how some of these, like, I mean, if you want to talk about the many generations that are in manufacturing today, I know that, and I'm not saying all baby boomers, because I have met some baby boomers who are really up to date on technology and they know how to work things. Um, but there are some from that generation who are kind of slow at picking up. Not saying that they're stupid or by any means, it's just not something they're used to. And if you're from a smaller community in a smaller machine shop or something, you might not understand the benefits. So what's the biggest barrier that you see, and like how do you help address that?
I think there's a couple of key things that are happening right now. I live in a world because of our
Hmm.
technology where a modular choice exists. But if you don't know about
Hmm.
Pico, you're looking across the existing systems that are out there and you don't see that. So just being aware of
Hmm.
what's even out there can be difficult. And then there
Hmm.
is no consumer reports for industrial software or tools, right? There's no wire cutter. So Gartner is a pay to
Right.
play. Anything in Gartner's quadrant is, you know what you're getting when it's there, and that's for enterprises anyway. So if I'm
Yeah.
a small and mid-sized factory, I don't even know what's out there or what's good and what's not, even how much it costs. Like half the places don't even publish their pricing. So how do I get started when I don't
Which
even know
I
what it is I'm
hate,
trying
by
to
the
buy?
way.
I know.
I
Yeah, well,
hate
go to
that
our
so
webpage.
much when ugh, I'm glad you have it.
Yeah, well, we just
Thumbs up
added
on the
it.
price.
There's a whole lot of people not happy about us putting it up there, but that's for other things. But yeah, fuck, sorry for my language, but like we're going forward. The uh, the key for us is, so awareness is a huge piece. The ability for people to try it. So like, you're only going to change if your status quo and what's possible over here has a big delta, right? If you can't
Yeah.
see a big delta, then you're just going to stay with what you've got, right? Otherwise the juice isn't worth the squeeze on the other side.
Hmm.
So one of the other main issues is small factories tend not to do the math. I call it doing the math. But if you produce 70 parts on Monday and you produce 60 parts on Tuesday and you produce 80 on Thursday, you're like, where the hell did that come from? Right? Every one of those is, anything that isn't the highest one you've recorded, that's a loss. And
Mm-hmm.
most often people don't add it up. They just say, oh, well, Bill was running it on Monday, he produces 80 parts, and John was producing it on Tuesday and he always gets 70. Bill's just better than John. And you're like, well, I don't necessarily believe that. They may not line up perfectly, but I would imagine, 80 versus 70, that's a significant improvement potential. That's over 10%.
Right.
Might want to figure out how to get John up there. But if you don't do the math and quantify what that actually cost you in terms of either extra labor you had to run or equipment, uptime, loss of capacity, because if you produced one more part, you could sell one more part. Well, then you're never going to be able to justify technology to actually try to fix it. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're often coaching engineers and we're like, oh, this would make my job so much easier. I could get this work done so much faster. And I'm like, your executives, I wish they cared about your day. They don't. They're just going to tell you to work more, right? They're
Yeah.
managing a P&L, a profit and loss statement, and that new technology is a cost if you can't show a benefit on the other side. So we're
Right.
often coaching people on how to do that math. So that they can justify it.
But that just
Between the
reminds me of
two,
like
yeah,
that just reminds me of the type of company that like my brother works for. They're really old school in the way that they do things, and like you said, they just don't care about their
they have.
employees. Like they just
I know I do believe 90% plus actually care about their
yeah,
employees,
for
but
sure.
the priority that person's trying to solve, the problem that person's trying to solve, like how am I going to grow this business 10% this year? How am I going to manage this new customer contract? Do I got to buy equipment?
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to have to do? That is very different and at a higher level than this person is just telling me they want, it's like noise in a lot of ways because
Yeah.
that's not tied to the thing they're trying to solve. And we're all humans. It's hard for our brains to switch from the thing we were thinking about to something else if we're not prepared for it. And so if you can come in and speak a little bit of common language and say, listen,
Mm.
by me having 20% less time spent doing this activity, like I can do work instructions 5 times faster, so therefore it frees up 4 hours project this month, and I normally wouldn't. And through previous measurements, every time I do a Kaizen, it's worth 50 grand, right? Well, like that's one way to justify your time. Often it's
Mm-hmm.
even better on the other side of it, where you're like, by me implementing this, we actually will get 10% improvement in output, which is a softball. I can go into anybody's line and go get 10%. You'd be shocked. Like even ones that run really well still often have more left in them. But just getting that softball, if you're making 20 million a year in revenue coming out of there, and let's say your material cost is 60%, your commodity producer, automotive supplier, something like that, like you're
Mm-hmm.
still talking hundreds of thousands of dollars of net profit, literally cash in the bank that will come from being able to produce 10% more of that good from the same equipment, right? That easily justifies the cost of systems like Pico. But
Yeah.
not the $1 million waste of monies, but the lower cost new generation tools can easily do that. But it has to have that. So doing the math is one side, and then to solve the I don't know whose stuff is better than whose, because everybody will tell you they can do everything for nothing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's basically the marketing
They're the
spiel.
best and number one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all bullshit. And like I hope someday someone spools up, we'll sign up for it at the moment, but some way to test it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
um, whether it's a trade show showdown or some independent reviewer who's able to actually understand like how long it takes to do something, what teams are good at and what they're not. I would love to see that happen. I don't know how to do it, but if it is ever occurred, we'd support it, because if my software is not the right answer, I don't want you to use it, because you're just going to be a pain
Right.
in my ass, right? Like asking for changes, and if it doesn't fit, it's bad for everybody. But if it
Yeah.
does fit and it can work really well, then we would love the world to know that, so that others can learn and adapt.
But I like the fact that you're putting that out there though too, because I feel like some people are afraid to just kind of stand behind their product, and you're like, no, put any software up against ours. And we got, like, I thought that was really cool of you to be that confident in your product.
Yeah.
So how do you see the role of affordable software evolving in the future of manufacturing?
To me, I'm going to come back to that scale factor, right?
Okay.
Like our goal is to see the industry improve dramatically. I want to see it happen
Mm-hmm.
by 2030, right? Like that's you want. Then I'll worry about what artificial intelligence can do on top of the data set that's generated for future improvements. But for now, getting that factory backbone is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And as things scale, so for anybody that's seen how software is sold, right? Like, yes, it can be very profitable, but it's also extremely expensive to create up front. Like we are tens of millions of dollars into creating Pico. Like no one factory could ever justify that cost. So the bigger the pool that it's spread across, the more we can drive affordability into it. The more affordable
Mm-hmm.
it is, the easier it is to take a first step. Even, oh, I used it. Oh, I hated it. Throw it away. Download my Pico. You can exit to PDF in Excel file, CSV file of all your build data, right? So like we make it just as easy to get off as it is to get on, so that you'll
Yeah.
take that step. And it's just reducing friction. So the more affordable it is, the more people can take that step, try it, improve, find a solution that works for you. Hopefully we pressure other competitors to also have a lightweight starting version of their system, so you have more than one choice to try. Like you can actually see different applications and what things are good at and what they're not. And then that will
Mm-hmm.
cause this catalyst to occur. And then my passion of being able to, like when I'm working on a large automotive line, I always wanted to be able to scan the barcode of the part that didn't fit in the goddamn fixture, right? And be able to see cradle grave data on the thing. So I know, do I have one bad part or 500 bad parts? Like, am I screwed
Yeah.
and there goes lunch today? Or is it like, nope, just a down rev part got in, I'm going to yell at somebody, but it's not a huge deal. Grab a different one and go, right? Like
Right.
that all should happen. It happens in our regular lives. It just doesn't happen in factories. And so that's how I see things. I think it will get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and faster and faster and faster to have technology like this. And anybody who's trying to charge value based and convincing you the investment banker approach of,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to make $1 million off of this, so I want 400,000 for mine. And if you don't give it to me, you're not going to get that $1 million. Like it's skeezy. I don't like that.
Yeah.
So
I
I want to
don't
be able
either.
to. I want a fair price for the hard work my team did to create these products. And like we're not a charity. Our free product is limited to 10 stations. Anybody bigger than that can easily afford the $100 to $1,000 a month, depending on how big you are,
Mm-hmm.
fee. But it does give that reduced friction for people to get started.
So do you think your approach to making software affordable is influencing other companies in the manufacturing tech space? Do you think
I have no idea. I hope
you
so.
hope?
Who influenced us, right? MaintainX is the one that has a freemium system for the preventive maintenance side of the house. You can write a couple work orders, I think, free of charge. That's who influenced us. And Odoo, one of the cloud ERPs, has a free piece. So they influenced us. I would love to see competitors of ours be influenced by what we're
Mhm.
doing. I mean, we're pretty small in the market, so most people just write us off as not interesting, which I love. That's my favorite place to be. It's just
I
come
like
up right behind you
underdogs.
and take a yeah. It's just
Y-
they underestimate me, and that's when you lose. That's a really
Yeah,
fun thing to happen. But
that's
we'll see.
interesting that you mentioned MaintainX because I actually am interviewing two of their engineers. I think they're engineers. I might misspoke on that, but it's two of their women on their team that are coming on to
Yeah,
Mavens. So I'm super excited. So that's good
they're
that you know one another. But
yeah
well,
they're
Ryan, this
they're all
has been
thick as thieves in the startup world. So.
well, Ryan, this has been really interesting, and I love your passion behind things. Don't worry about the cussing because that's who I am. So I appreciate your authenticity, and like we need more of that. I believe in this space. So I'm really going to be interested in seeing how Pico MES like grows from here on out, and what you're gonna come up with next and how things are going to continue to evolve for you. But I do want to give you a chance, and we are well over time, but that's okay because I like these types of conversations where you just get lost in the technology stuff. But I want to give you a chance to ask our audience an ask. So if you had one ask for our audience, what would that ask be for them?
Yeah, just stop accepting that you can't do anything. Take a step.
Yeah.
That's all I care about, people. What's the worst that happens? You try something for a month and you turn it back off. Like, you don't have to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum of crazy, fully integrated system, but you got to start somewhere. So take that step.
Yeah.
That's
good
what matters
advice.
to me. And then don't be shy. Like, tell us where it didn't work. We can't fix what we don't know. Like, so
Right.
anyway,
I
that's what I
love
hope it is.
I love the negative feedback that people will provide companies, and I love companies even more when they take that negative feedback in consideration and actually improve their processes for it. I used to work with companies back in the day where anytime they got a negative review on their stuff, they would delete it because they didn't want any negative thing out there. I'm like, no, don't delete it. Like, respond and say you're working on it or something. Like, don't ever delete that because then it's gonna like come across as you don't care what that individual said or that you're not willing to improve. Like, don't ever delete negative unless it's like really ridiculous and horrible. Then yeah, maybe clean it up a bit.
I mean,
I don't know, but
we make mistakes all the time. The key is to not make them twice. Don't make the same mistake twice. And that's how we approach it. So,
well, Ryan, thanks again. How can people get in touch with you if they have any more questions? Where should they go? And are you going to be at any upcoming trade shows that people can connect with you?
yep. So you can always reach out on our website, picomes.com. It has the button on it that says try for free. It'll auto spool up a deployment for you. You can literally use our software that way. There's also another
Awesome.
button on there that says request a demo, and you can connect to our team if you want a more consultative approach. And then, yeah, we'll be at the assembly show in Rosemont coming up in this fall. So I think it's the first week of
Okay.
October or something like that. You
I
can
think so.
use the system live. Like, there will be benches right then and there. Pull the trigger, call BS, tell me you like it, tell me you hate it. Like, you'll be able to do it right then and there. So
Awesome. So he's challenging you to go to their booth and find something wrong with it
that's right.
so that they can fix it. All right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today on A Moment with Mavens. For those watching, thank you as well. Where am I going to spend my next moment? I have no idea, but tune in and you'll find out. Have a great one, everyone. Bye.
Bye.